The sound of ripping fabric echoed through the empty hallway like a gunshot. Ethan Bradford stood there, clutching a piece of white cotton in his fist like a trophy, his eyes blazing with entitled fury. The new teacher, Isabella Reyes, remained perfectly still, her torn shirt hanging open from shoulder to waist, exposing the sports bra underneath. Behind Ethan, his crew of football players held up their phones, recording everything, their laughter bouncing off the polished floors of Westbrook Academy. "You think you can fail me?" Ethan snarled, stepping closer. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Isabella didn't flinch. She didn't cover herself. She simply looked directly into his eyes with an unsettling calm that made the laughter die in their throats. Then she leaned forward slightly and whispered something. Just one sentence. The color drained from Ethan Bradford's face, as if someone had pulled a plug. The 18-year-old who had driven 7 teachers to quit in 3 years suddenly looked like a frightened child. 4 weeks earlier, Isabella Reyes had walked through the mahogany doors of Westbrook Academy for the first time. At 28, she appeared younger, with delicate features and dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The kind of woman people might describe as pretty but forgettable. Principal David Bradford had greeted her personally in his office, a space that reeked of old money and newer corruption. "Miss Reyes," he'd said, his smile not reaching his eyes, "we're delighted to have you join our English department. I trust you understand that Westbrook operates on certain traditions." Isabella had nodded, taking mental notes of everything. The Rolex on his wrist worth more than most teachers' annual salaries. The way his office door had been specially soundproofed. The security cameras in the hallway that seemed to have convenient blind spots. She'd pulled out a unique pen, one that recorded audio while appearing completely ordinary, and began filling out paperwork. "Of course, Principal Bradford, I believe in maintaining established systems," she'd replied, her voice carrying just the right amount of deference. He'd seemed satisfied with that answer, never noticing how her eyes had tracked the locked filing cabinet behind his desk, or the way she'd memorized the layout of his office in seconds. Isabella's first encounter with Ethan Bradford came during her 3rd period AP Literature class. He'd swaggered in 10 minutes late, his Letterman jacket worn like armor, his friends trailing behind him like hyenas following a lion, without acknowledging her. He'd taken his seat in the back row and immediately began disrupting the lesson. "So we're reading more dead white guys," he'd called out when she'd introduced their unit on classic American literature. How original! The class had held its breath, waiting to see how the new teacher would react. They'd seen this play before. Ethan would push and push until teachers either broke down or gave up trying to discipline him. After all, his father controlled their jobs. Isabella had simply continued writing on the board, then turned with a pleasant smile. "That's an interesting perspective. Ethan, perhaps you'd like to lead our discussion on systemic power structures in literature, or would that require actually doing the reading?" A few students had gasped softly. Ethan's jaw had tightened. "I don't need to read some dusty book to understand power." "Miss Reyes?" "No." Isabella had tilted her head slightly. "Then you must understand how temporary power can be when it's built on someone else's foundation, like a house of cards, or a principal's position that depends on clean audits." The room had gone silent. Even Ethan had looked uncertain, not quite sure if she'd just threatened his father or made an innocent observation about job security. Isabella had turned back to the board, continuing the lesson as if nothing had happened. But she'd noticed how Ethan's eyes had followed her for the rest of the class, trying to figure her out. Over the following weeks, Isabella had established herself as an oddity at Westbrook Academy. She parked her modest Honda Civic in the far corner of the lot, always reversing in for a quick exit. She never ate in the teacher's lounge, preferring to grade papers in her classroom where she could see both doors. When books fell or sudden noises occurred, her reflexes were faster than they should be for a simple English teacher. The other faculty members had tried to warn her, in their own careful ways. Mrs. Peterson, who'd taught chemistry for 15 years, had cornered her after a staff meeting. "You should be careful with the Bradford boy," she'd whispered, glancing around nervously. "The last teacher who failed him, well, she doesn't teach anymore, anywhere." Isabella had thanked her politely, filing away the information while maintaining her cover of naive concern. What Mrs. Peterson didn't know was that Isabella had already pulled the records of every teacher who'd left Westbrook in the past 5 years. The pattern was clear and damning. Ethan's harassment campaign had started subtly. First came the disrespect in class, talking over her, making snide comments about her appearance, her heritage, her probably sad personal life. Isabella had documented every instance, not in a regular notebook, but in a specially coded system that would hold up in federal court. Then came the digital attacks. Someone had created an Instagram account using her name and photo, posting inappropriate content that bordered on pornographic. The posts tagged Westbrook Academy and made insinuations about why she'd really been hired. Most teachers would have been mortified, frantically trying to get the account removed while dealing with the professional humiliation. Isabella had simply taken screenshots, her fingers flying across her phone with practiced efficiency. She'd pulled up the metadata, traced the IP address, and added everything to a file labeled EH217. When concerned colleagues had approached her about the terrible situation, she'd smiled calmly and said, "High school boys will be boys, right? That's what everyone keeps telling me," at exactly the 25% mark of her operation. Isabella had made her first strategic move. She'd been grading papers when she'd pulled out what looked like a standard smartphone. But this device was far from ordinary. The screen displayed a specialized legal recording application used by law enforcement and high-end legal firms. This technology could capture audio with studio-quality clarity, automatically transcribe conversations, and most importantly, timestamp everything with blockchain verification that would hold up in any court. Every threat, every harassment, every single word spoken in her presence was being cataloged and stored in multiple secure servers, building an airtight case that would be admissible as evidence. She'd used it to record Ethan's latest tirade about how she was just another diversity hire who didn't belong at Westbrook. The app had captured not just his words, but voice pattern analysis that could prove identity, stress levels that indicated premeditation, and even background conversations from his crew planning their next move against her. The escalation had been predictable as clockwork. Her car had been vandalized next, red spray paint spelling out vulgar words across the windshield. The security footage from that section of the parking lot had mysteriously corrupted. According to the administration, Isabella had anticipated this, having installed her own discrete cameras that uploaded directly to cloud storage. "Such a shame about your car," Principal Bradford had said during their next meeting, not bothering to hide his smirk. "Perhaps you should consider whether Westbrook is really the right fit for someone like you." "Someone like me?" Isabella had asked innocently. "Someone who doesn't understand how things work here. My son tells me you've been unfairly targeting him in class. Failing grades for one of our star athletes could impact his Stanford scholarship." Isabella had leaned forward slightly. "Your son has failed to turn in 60% of his assignments. The ones he has submitted were clearly plagiarized. I have documentation of everything, including the original sources he copied from. Would Stanford be interested in that information? The principal's face had darkened. Are you threatening me, Miss Reyes? I'm educating you, Principal Bradford. Isn't that what we're here for? After that meeting, Isabella had noticed the surveillance on her increasing. Ethan and his crew had started following her after school, taking photos, making notes about where she went. They thought they were hunting her. They had no idea she was leading them exactly where she wanted them to go. The preparation phase had required patience. Isabella had spent her evenings in her small apartment, which was far more than it appeared. Behind the modest furniture and teacher-appropriate decorations was a sophisticated setup. Multiple monitors displayed feeds from the school, financial records that shouldn't have been accessible to a simple teacher, and communication intercepts that painted a picture of corruption far deeper than just one entitled boy and his enabling father. She'd received a call one evening, speaking in code to someone on the other end. The package is developing nicely. Secondary targets identified. Phase 2 can begin on your signal. Understood, the voice had replied. Remember, we need them to make the first move. Physical evidence will solidify everything. Isabella had smiled coldly. Don't worry. Teenage boys are predictable, especially ones who've never faced real consequences. The next day at school had brought a new level of boldness from Ethan. He'd cornered her in the supply closet while she was getting materials, his friends blocking the doorway. You know, he'd said, invading her personal space. You're not bad looking for a diversity hire. Maybe if you were a little friendlier, we could work something out about those grades. Isabella had remained calm, even as his hand had reached toward her. I suggest you step back, Ethan. Or what? You'll report me to my dad. He'd laughed. Get real, you're nobody. Just another teacher who's about to learn her place. She'd sidestepped him smoothly, muscle memory from years of training making the movement look casual rather than tactical. Your father's embezzlement of $2.3 million in federal education funds might make him too busy to deal with your behavioral issues. Ethan had frozen. What did you just say? Nothing, Isabella had replied sweetly. Just thinking out loud about how interesting forensic accounting can be. All those hidden transfers, offshore accounts, the kind of thing that would make a fascinating lesson on corruption in American literature. She'd left him standing there, mouth agape, his friends exchanging worried glances. The seed of fear had been planted. Now she just needed to wait for it to bloom into full panic. The days following Isabella's cryptic comment about forensic accounting saw Ethan Bradford unraveling like a cheap sweater. He'd started making mistakes, fumbling passes at football practice, snapping at his friends. His father had noticed, too, pulling him aside after one particularly disastrous game. What's wrong with you? Principal Bradford had demanded. Scouts are watching. You can't afford to fall apart now. Ethan had wanted to tell his father about the teacher's strange comments, about the way she looked at them, like she knew secrets they'd buried. But something held him back. Maybe it was the way his father's eye twitched whenever anyone mentioned federal funding, or how he'd installed that new safe in his office last month. Isabella had watched it all with satisfaction, continuing her classes as if nothing was amiss. She'd given Ethan chance after chance to submit his work, documenting each refusal, each plagiarized attempt, each threatening gesture. The file she was building had grown thick with evidence. At the 60% mark of her timeline, Isabella had made another calculated move. Alone in her apartment, She'd opened her laptop to reveal specialized software that most teachers couldn't afford or even know existed. The screen displayed a professional-grade legal analysis platform used by top-tier law firms and federal agencies. This AI-powered system could process thousands of documents in minutes, identifying patterns of financial fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement with surgical precision. As she fed it the data she'd collected on Principal Bradford's transactions, the software began connecting dots that would have taken human analysts months to uncover. Each flagged transaction was automatically categorized by relevant federal statutes, building a prosecutorial roadmap that would be devastating in court. The software had confirmed what she'd suspected. The $2.3 million was just the tip of the iceberg. Principal Bradford had been running a sophisticated scheme for over a decade, siphoning funds meant for underprivileged students into a web of shell companies and offshore accounts. Ethan's expensive car, his designer clothes, his assumption that money could buy him out of any situation. It was all built on stolen futures of kids who needed those resources. The confrontation Isabella had been orchestrating finally came on a gray Thursday afternoon. She'd deliberately kept Ethan after class, going through his latest failed assignment with meticulous detail. Each correction, another twist of the knife in his inflated ego. "This is bullshit," he'd exploded, slamming his hand on her desk. "You're just out to get me because I called you out for what you are." "And what am I?" "Ethan," Isabella had asked calmly, organizing her papers. "A nobody who thinks she can come into our school and change things. But you're about to learn that some things don't change. Some people don't lose." Isabella had stood, gathering her materials. "You're right. Some people don't lose. They just haven't been caught yet." She'd walked past him toward the door, knowing he would follow. The hallway was empty by design. She'd scheduled this confrontation for when the building would be nearly deserted. Only the distant sound of basketball practice echoing from the gym. The security cameras in this particular corridor had been malfunctioning for weeks. A fact she'd confirmed with the maintenance staff, who'd been told not to fix them by administration. "Hey!" Ethan had called out, his footsteps heavy behind her. "I'm not done talking to you." Isabella had turned slowly, her back to the wall, positioning herself exactly where she needed to be, behind Ethan. His three closest friends had appeared as if on cue. Marcus, the linebacker with more muscle than sense. Derek, whose father owned half the commercial real estate in town, and Kyle, who'd been arrested twice for assault, but never charged thanks to Bradford's influence. "Gentlemen," Isabella had said evenly, "can I help you?" "Yeah." Ethan had stepped closer, his 6'2" frame trying to intimidate her 5'5" stature. "You can help yourself to a new job, somewhere far away from here." "Is that a threat?" Ethan, "It's a promise." His hands had clenched and unclenched at his sides. "See, you made a mistake. You mentioned some numbers the other day, some very specific numbers. Makes me wonder where a teacher might hear something like that." Isabella had allowed a small smile. "Maybe I'm just good with numbers. After all, I calculated your GPA correctly, 0.8. Wasn't it? That must be a Bradford family record." The rage that flashed across his face was exactly what she'd been waiting for, in one violent motion. Ethan had reached out and grabbed her shirt, yanking hard. The fabric tore with a sound that seemed to echo in the empty hallway. Buttons scattering across the floor. Behind him, Marcus had his phone up, recording everything, while Derek and Kyle laughed like hyenas. But Isabella hadn't screamed. She hadn't cowered or tried to cover herself. Instead, She'd stood there in her ruined shirt and sports bra, looking at Ethan with an expression that made the laughter die in their throats. Then she'd leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow filling the space between them. Cayman National Bank, account number 447B-X9, $2.3 million. Tuesday, March 15th, 3:47 p.m. Transfer from the Federal Education Improvement Fund. Your father's login credentials used from IP address 192.168.1.154, his office computer. Ethan's grip on her torn shirt had gone slack, the fabric falling from nerveless fingers. His face had gone from red to white so fast it looked like someone had drained him. "There's more," Isabella had continued, her voice still soft, almost conversational. "The video files on the school server. Folder named Insurance. Your father and Miss Blake. The chemistry teacher. Very comprehensive. Very compromising. Time-stamped during school board meetings when your mother thought he was discussing budgets." "You're lying," Ethan had whispered, but his voice cracked like a 13-year-old's. Isabella had reached into her jacket pocket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a leather wallet. It flipped open to reveal a badge that made all four boys take an involuntary step back. Special Agent Isabella Reyes, FBI Financial Crimes Division. "You're right, Ethan. I'm not a real teacher. I've been undercover for 4 months, building a case against your father's embezzlement ring. But congratulations, you just gave me the bonus of assault on a federal agent. On camera." She'd gestured casually to where her own concealed cameras were positioned. Tiny dots they'd never noticed. "Oh, didn't I mention, when the school's security system fails, professionals bring their own." The sound of sirens had started faint, but grew louder rapidly. Ethan's friends had backed away, Marcus dropping his phone in panic. But Ethan himself seemed frozen, his world crashing down around him in real time. "My dad will destroy you," he'd managed to choke out. "Your dad is probably being arrested right about now." Isabella had checked her watch. 3:52 p.m., right on schedule. We've had agents in position since this morning. The school board meeting he's attending, it's actually a federal grand jury indictment. Through the windows, they could see black SUVs pulling into the parking lot, agents in FBI windbreakers emerging with practiced efficiency. Some headed for the administration offices. Others positioned themselves at exits. "You set me up," Ethan accused, his voice breaking completely now. "You set yourself up," Isabella corrected. "I just gave you the rope. You're the one who decided to hang yourself with it. Every threat, every act of harassment, every single moment of your entitled brutality has been documented. You thought being the principal's son made you untouchable. But here's what they don't teach in your prep school classes. Federal law doesn't care about your last name." The doors at the end of the hallway burst open. Principal Bradford was being led out in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a mask of shock and fury. Behind him, school board members, the district superintendent, even the head of maintenance who'd helped cover up the security camera sabotage, a parade of corruption being marched into custody. "Ethan," Bradford had called out, seeing his son. "Don't say anything, don't—" "David Bradford, you have the right to remain silent." The agent escorting him cut him off. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Ethan had turned back to Isabella, tears now streaming down his face. "Please, this will ruin everything. My future, my family. Your future was built on money stolen from kids who actually needed it," Isabella had said, her voice finally showing emotion, not sympathy. but cold anger. Your family's comfort came from denying opportunities to hundreds of students. So yes, Ethan, everything built on lies and theft should be ruined. Another agent had approached them, nodding to Isabella. Agent Reyes, we need to process the scene. Of course, she'd gestured to Ethan. This one assaulted me. Multiple witnesses, video evidence. I want him charged as an adult. No, Ethan had lunged forward, but the agent caught him easily, spinning him around and cuffing him with practiced efficiency. As they'd led him away, Isabella had called out, "Oh, Ethan, that Stanford scholarship you were so proud of. They'll be getting a comprehensive report about your academic fraud." Turns out they really don't like plagiarism or federal crimes. The hallway had filled with law enforcement, crime scene technicians, and investigators. Isabella had given her statement calmly, professionally, showing them the torn shirt, the scattered buttons, the evidence of assault. Through it all, she'd maintained the demeanor of someone who'd done this many times before. Hours later, after the statements were given and the scene processed, Isabella had stood in the empty parking lot. The school would be closed indefinitely, the entire administration under investigation. 12 arrests in total, with more expected as the Financial Crimes Unit followed the money trail. She'd walked to her modest Honda Civic, no longer needing to maintain her cover. As she'd opened the door, her phone had buzzed with a secure message. She'd read it, a slight smile crossing her face. The next morning's news had been everything she'd orchestrated. Massive corruption scandal rocks elite prep school dominated headlines. Ethan's mugshot, the golden boy reduced to a criminal defendant, was particularly prominent. The story detailed years of embezzlement, grade fixing, and systemic abuse enabled by stolen funds. But Isabella was already gone. The apartment cleared, her false identity retired. The only trace of her existence at Westbrook Academy was the testimony that would send a dozen people to prison and return millions to the students who needed it. 2 weeks later, in a different state, a young woman with auburn hair and green eyes introduced herself to the staff of another elite private school. "Hello, I'm Sarah Chen. I'm here for the history teacher position." The principal, an older man with an expensive watch and nervous habits, welcomed her warmly. Behind him, his son lounged against the office door, sizing up the new teacher with predatory eyes. "Welcome to Riverside Preparatory, Miss Chen," the principal said. "I'm sure you'll find we do things a certain way here." "I'm counting on it," she replied with a pleasant smile, her hand unconsciously checking the recording device in her pocket. Some predators wear letterman jackets and hide behind family names. But sometimes, justice comes disguised as a quiet teacher with a secret badge and a promise that no bully is too powerful to fall. The hunt continues, one corrupt school at a time.